Something brought you to this moment, and it wasn't chance. There's a recognition happening in your soul right now, a knowing that what I'm about to reveal has been stirring within you for longer than you realize. That inexplicable spiritual exhaustion that no amount of meditation seems to heal. That loss of connection with practices that once lifted you higher. That profound emptiness that appears precisely when your spiritual life should be flourishing. Carl Jung spent decades unraveling this mystery, and what he discovered will fundamentally shift how you understand what you're experiencing right now. We've been conditioned to believe that spiritual growth is a linear ascent, that once you're on the path, every step should feel inspired, meaningful, connected. But Jung uncovered something that spiritual teachers rarely discuss. There exists a hidden architecture to spiritual development that includes what he called necessary disintegration, periods where your entire spiritual identity must dissolve so that something far more authentic can emerge. Have you noticed that your deepest spiritual crises often follow your greatest breakthroughs? That moments of profound disconnection seem to arrive just when you thought you'd finally found your rhythm. You're not failing spiritually. You're not doing anything wrong. You're experiencing what Jung identified as the most crucial phase of genuine spiritual maturation. The death of who you thought you were meant to be. This isn't just theory. Jung discovered this through his own devastating spiritual collapse in 1913, when everything he'd built his identity upon crumbled in a matter of months. What emerged from that breakdown became the foundation for everything we now know about the psyche, individuation, and the authentic spiritual journey. If what I'm sharing resonates with something deep inside you, subscribe to this channel, because we're about to explore territory that most spiritual content avoids entirely. This isn't about positive thinking or manifestation techniques. This is about the raw, real process of becoming who you actually are, beneath all the spiritual personas you've constructed. Let me take you into the heart of what Jung really discovered during those dark years when he thought he was losing his mind. He began to realize that what we call spiritual burnout is actually the psyche's natural mechanism for outgrowing outdated forms of meaning. Your soul knows when you've extracted all possible growth from your current level of spiritual understanding, and it initiates what Jung called creative destruction to make space for something unprecedented. But here's what's crucial to understand. This process doesn't happen because something's wrong with you. It happens because something's profoundly right. Your psyche has developed beyond the containers that once held your spiritual experience, and now it's demanding a complete reconstruction of how you relate to the sacred. Jung observed that every authentic spiritual seeker goes through multiple cycles of what he termed deaths and rebirths. Each cycle involves the complete dissolution of your previous spiritual identity, followed by a period of profound disorientation, and finally, the emergence of something entirely new. The people who resist these cycles remain trapped in immature forms of spirituality. Those who learn to cooperate with them develop what Jung called psychological wisdom, the ability to find meaning in meaninglessness, to discover the sacred in apparent emptiness. During my own deepest spiritual winter, I remember feeling as though every prayer bounced back from a closed heaven. Every meditation session felt empty. Every spiritual book seemed to speak a language I'd forgotten how to understand. It was Jung's insights that helped me recognize I wasn't losing my connection to the divine. I was being initiated into a form of connection that transcended my need for constant spiritual highs. Here's the second revelation that will change everything. Your spiritual burnout is often the result of having been unconsciously performing spirituality rather than living it. Jung understood that the ego loves to create spiritual personas: the enlightened self, the awakened being, the evolved soul. But these personas eventually become prisons that prevent genuine spiritual development. Your current exhaustion might be your psyche's way of liberating you from spiritual personas that have outlived their usefulness. It's forcing you to confront a fundamental question: who are you when you strip away all the spiritual identities you've collected? This is terrifying for the ego, but it's essential for authentic growth. Jung discovered something that revolutionized his understanding of spiritual development. The most profound transformations happen not during peak experiences, but during what he called the nigredo, periods of darkness, confusion, and apparent spiritual death. These aren't interruptions in your spiritual journey. They are the journey, revealing itself in the only way that can dissolve old limitations and create genuine expansion. But there's something even deeper I need to share with you. Jung realized that spiritual burnout often signals that you've outgrown not just your practices, but your entire relationship with seeking itself. You may be experiencing what he called the end of the seeker's journey, the point where the one who seeks and the thing being sought begin to merge into something that transcends both. If you've made it this far, something in you recognizes the truth of what I'm sharing. Turn on notifications, because what we're exploring together represents some of the most profound insights into human consciousness that have ever been documented, and each understanding we uncover together might be exactly what your soul has been preparing for. Now let me guide you into the deepest layer of Jung's discovery about spiritual burnout. He came to understand that these periods of apparent spiritual death are actually incubation chambers for wholeness. While your conscious mind experiences emptiness and disconnection, your unconscious is orchestrating a complete reconstruction of your psychic architecture to accommodate levels of integration that were previously impossible. Jung observed that every person who undergoes genuine spiritual transformation experiences what he called the dark night of the modern soul. This isn't the classical dark night described by mystics like St. John of the Cross. This is something uniquely contemporary, a disintegration that occurs when you've absorbed so much spiritual information that your psyche can no longer process it through old structures. Your spiritual burnout might be signaling that you've reached what Jung called saturation point, where you've taken in more spiritual concepts, practices, and experiences than your current level of consciousness can integrate. Your psyche is forcing a shutdown so that a fundamental reorganization can occur at the deepest levels of your being. Here's what most people miss about these periods. They're not empty spaces between meaningful experiences. They are the most creatively active periods of your entire spiritual development. While you experience apparent nothingness, your unconscious is working with extraordinary intensity to create new neural pathways, new understanding, new capacities that will eventually emerge as unprecedented clarity and connection. Jung wrote something that became a guiding light during my own periods of spiritual darkness. The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. Your spiritual burnout might be life's way of stripping away everything that isn't authentically you, including spiritual identities that never truly fit, practices that you adopted to belong rather than grow, and beliefs that you inherited rather than discovered. During his own breakdown, Jung began what he called active imagination, a process of dialoguing with the images, feelings, and experiences that emerged from his unconscious during this period of apparent spiritual death. Instead of trying to escape or transcend his spiritual burnout, he learned to enter into relationship with it, to discover what it was trying to communicate, what transformation it was facilitating. What Jung discovered through this process revolutionized his understanding of spiritual development. Every symptom of spiritual crisis is also an attempt at spiritual healing. Your burnout isn't just the absence of connection, it's your psyche's way of creating space for a form of connection that transcends anything you've previously experienced. Jung identified what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to create entirely new forms of meaning from the tension between opposing forces. Your current experience of spiritual emptiness and your longing for connection are creating exactly the kind of tension that the transcendent function uses to birth unprecedented forms of spiritual understanding. In his later work, Jung wrote about something he called the union of opposites, moments when contradictory aspects of spiritual experience suddenly reveal themselves as complementary parts of a larger wholeness. Your spiritual burnout and your spiritual seeking aren't enemies, they're partners in a dance that's creating something neither could achieve alone. Here's the third and most important revelation. Jung discovered that spiritual burnout often precedes the emergence of what he called authentic spirituality, a way of being that doesn't depend on constant peak experiences, doesn't require perfect practices, doesn't need to maintain any particular spiritual persona. It's a spirituality that can find the sacred in emptiness, meaning in meaninglessness, connection in apparent disconnection. Through decades of working with people experiencing spiritual crises, Jung observed a consistent pattern. Those who learned to embrace their spiritual burnout rather than resist it emerged with what he called psychological sovereignty, the ability to maintain inner stability regardless of external spiritual circumstances. Your spiritual burnout might be preparing you for the greatest gift Jung identified, the capacity to be spiritually self-generating. Instead of depending on teachers, practices, experiences, or communities to maintain your connection to the sacred, you develop an internal source of spiritual nourishment that can't be depleted by external circumstances. Jung wrote near the end of his life, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Your spiritual burnout might be life's invitation to accept even your spiritual emptiness, your disconnection, your confusion as sacred aspects of your journey rather than problems to be solved. I've observed over years of studying Jung's work and my own spiritual development that the people who experience the most profound spiritual burnout often emerge as the most authentic spiritual teachers and healers. Not because they've transcended human limitations, but because they've learned to find the divine within every aspect of human experience, including the aspects that feel most distant from the divine. Jung understood that spiritual maturation isn't about becoming someone different. It's about becoming more completely who you already are. Your spiritual burnout might be dissolving everything that isn't essential to your authentic spiritual nature, leaving only what is truly, irreducibly you. There's one final insight Jung left us that will transform how you navigate these periods of spiritual darkness. Burnout isn't the opposite of spiritual vitality. It's often the cocoon from which the deepest spiritual vitality emerges. Like a caterpillar that must completely dissolve before becoming a butterfly, your spiritual identity must sometimes disintegrate entirely before your authentic spiritual nature can emerge. During my deepest periods of spiritual emptiness, I've learned that what feels like the absence of the sacred is often the presence of the sacred in a form so vast, so complete, that my conditioned spiritual perception can't recognize it. Jung knew this. We don't lose contact with the divine during spiritual burnout. We make contact with aspects of the divine that our previous spiritual understanding was too limited to perceive. Your current experience of spiritual burnout isn't a detour from your spiritual path. It is your spiritual path, revealing itself in the only way that can free you from spiritual limitations you didn't even know you had. Jung showed us that the goal isn't to avoid these periods of spiritual death, but to learn to die consciously, willingly, knowing that each death creates space for a resurrection you couldn't have imagined. If you've stayed with me through this entire exploration, share in the comments what your own experience with spiritual burnout has taught you. Your insights might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to understand that their spiritual crisis is actually their spiritual initiation. Right now, as these words resonate within you, something in your soul already knows that this understanding will forever change your relationship with the difficult passages of your spiritual journey. Jung revealed that we don't need to escape our humanness to find the divine. We need to embrace it completely, and it's in that total acceptance that we discover who we really are. Your spiritual burnout isn't blocking your spiritual evolution. It is your spiritual evolution unfolding in the only way that can take you to your next level of authentic being.